Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Ovika Enigma Goliath. This was one of the two EDH decks that was submitted for the viewer brew review, and I liked it so much that I wanted to go in and try to optimize and fix the deck up. So what is Ovika Enigma Goliath? It is an Izzet 7 mana 6/6 flyer, ward 3, pay 3 life. So it makes it somewhat difficult to kill with removal. And then the main third ability, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create X 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens, where X is the mana value of that spell. They gain haste until end of turn. So there's a lot of different ways that you could go with this deck, but primarily you want to be playing either expensive spells that you're either cheating out or reducing the costs of so that you can make a bunch of goblins, or you want to play a bunch of cheap spells that you can chain together to create a bunch of goblins. And then you want combos that either go off based on casting a bunch of spells or having a bunch of tokens in play and then winning with the combos, or just flooding the board with tokens and then killing your opponent with all these haste tokens. So what are we doing with Ovika? So let's go through these one at a time. So we've got our ramp spells, of course, as usual, all of our various mana rocks and Dockside Extortionist, of course. In order to get Ovika out, it is 7 mana, so, we do need to find a way to get it out faster than normal. We've got March of Swirling Mist. This card has a number of uses. It can be used to phase out Ovika in case our opponent is trying to remove it. It can also phase out problem creatures on the opponent's side that are maybe going to win the game because they're combo creatures, or maybe they're like Collector Oof that is shutting off our ability to activate artifacts. We can phase that out. And because it's an X spell, you can sometimes just cast it for a whole bunch of mana to generate more tokens. Next, we've got big spells that will trigger Ovika. So there's like Rise of the Eldrazi, Seagate Restoration. These are just big spells that will make a whole bunch of tokens. Rise of the Eldrazi in particular, it is very expensive, and we do need mana rocks that can produce multiple colorless mana, which we do have, but this will generate 12 goblins, and then we'll take an extra turn, among other things. And then we just have other cards like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, which are technically high mana value at 8 mana, so they produce a bunch of tokens, but then they also are cheaper because we can delve them out, so that helps us cast these more expensive spells that make a bunch of goblin tokens. Now from there, we've got all of our usuals. We've got our keys to untap our mana rocks, like Mana Vault. We've got our artifact. We've got our counter spells, Offer Can't Refuse, Deflecting Swat, etc. And then a whole bunch of other stuff. We've also got fast mana because we want to get to Ovika as quickly as possible. So we've got Battle Hymn, add red to your mana pool for each creature you control, and Brightstone Ritual, add red to your mana pool for each goblin you control. So if we already have a bunch of tokens with Ovika, we can make a bunch more mana using these spells. Jessica's Will also just produces a bunch of mana and potentially finds us some more cards. Jeweled Lotus, Seething Song, which again is also great in that it produces 3 more goblins. Skirk Prospector, which is very important. We have our altar effects. So we've got Skirk Prospector, we've got Phyrexian Altar, and we've got Ashnod's Altar, which we can use to sack the goblin tokens that we're generating to make more mana. And these are going to be important when it comes to comboing. But we can also just use Skirk Prospector to ramp into Ovika faster. We've got Stormkiln Artist, which produces a treasure whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. So this helps us to get more mana for when we're ready to go off with our various combos. And then, of course, Blank Goblin to produce a bunch of red mana, similar to Seething Song. Although it's a creature, so it doesn't produce tokens, but it is also itself a goblin and can be sacked through Skirk Prospector. Then, just as some other things that we can do, Cyclonic Rift as a sweeper, Goblin Trash Master. Since we're producing a bunch of goblin tokens basically for free, this allows us to blow up all of our opponent's artifacts, including all of their mana rocks. We've got Krark the Thumbless. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you flip a coin. If you lose the flip, you bounce the spell back to your hand. If you win the flip, you copy the spell. So if we win the flip, we copy the spell. If we bounce the spell back to our hand, it's not too big of a problem because Ovika triggers on casting the spell, meaning we get to cast the spell again and get more goblin tokens for casting it and triggering it a second time. And then I thought it would be worth bringing up these battles. So we've got Invasion of Segovia, which enters and creates 2 blue Kraken tokens with trample. And then the backside is, of course, the part that's the most relevant. And the other good benefit of these battles is that Ovika produces haste goblins. So oftentimes we will already have maybe some goblins in play, or maybe Ovika has already been in play, and we can immediately attack and flip these battles over. So when you flip over Invasion of Segovia, it becomes Kaitis, Sea Tyrant of Segovia, which is a 3/3 creature, and its non-creature spells you cast have Convoke. So all of the spells that we're casting are producing goblin tokens, and we can then use those tokens to convoke out more spells, essentially making our spells free. Then we've got Invasion of Arcavios. This is a 5 mana battle. When it enters, you search your library, graveyard, or outside the game, so library or graveyard in this case, for an instant or sorcery, reveal it and put it into your hand, which is itself potentially pretty good, especially if it can find us combo pieces. But then when you flip it over, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you may choose new targets for the copy. And again, because it itself will produce 5 tokens just off of Ovika, and if we get 2 more tokens from anything, we can immediately attack the battle and flip it over. So what else are we doing here? Well, we've got our card draw, Archmage Emeritus. Since we are casting a bunch of spells, we may as well draw off of them. We've got Burgi, which produces red, so it does a similar effect as Stormkiln Artist, but we can also cast Burgi on the Horn side to discard a card, exile the top 2, you may play them this turn. So it can be pseudo card draw. Then we've got Dig Through Time, of course. We got Distant Melody. You choose a creature type, draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. So Pauper Elves players will be familiar with Distant Melody. In our deck, we're producing a ton of goblins. Even if you have no goblins when you first cast this spell, it alone will produce 4 goblins off of Ovika, and you'll draw at least 4 cards. Actually 5 cards, because they're Phyrexian goblins and Ovika is a Phyrexian. So you'll just go Distant Melody, choose Phyrexian, you generate 4 tokens, you draw 5 cards, which is not amazing in EDH, but 4 mana for 5 is pretty good. And of course, if you have any more goblins in play from potentially other spells or from previous turns, you will draw even more cards. We've got Frantic Search, draw 2, ditch 2, untap 3 lands. This is technically card negative, but it is value positive because we make 3 tokens and just untap our lands. Jessica's Will, we've got Keep Watch, draw a card for each attacking creature. So once again, alone, this creates 3 hasters, and if we have any more hasters, we can draw potentially tons and tons of cards off of this. Kindred Discovery, 5 mana enchantment, ETB, choose a creature type. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters or attacks, draw a card. So every spell will draw us an equal amount of cards equal to its value because we're making that many goblin tokens. And then if we attack with those goblin tokens, we also draw a gargantuan amount of cards. Lorien Revealed, which either just finds an island or draws 3 and produces 5 goblins. And then, of course, we've got the usual Mystic Remora, Rhystic Study, Skull Clamp. We're producing a bunch of X1 creatures. They're fantastic with Skull Clamp. And the One Ring, which is just fine as a way to draw cards and pairs up well with the keys. And then Wheel of Fortune. Wheels in EDH are kind of risky to do because it does fill up the opponent's hand, but this deck also has a bunch of fast mana, so it's potentially able to just produce a bunch of mana really quickly and then cast Wheel of Fortune on turn 1 or 2. Also, sometimes you just need to draw a bunch of cards and risk giving your opponent stuff. So those are the main things there. We've got our tutors up here, Mystical Tutor and Goblin Matron, which of course finds important cards like Skirk Prospector and Trash Master, but you can also find Krark or Blank Goblin if you need to. And then we've got our, we've got our combo cards and our win cons. So the win cons are cards that might be part of combos, but aren't necessarily part of combos. They can just win the game. So we've got all of our cards that care about all of these tokens we're spewing out. So Impact Tremors, ETBs cause 1 damage. Perforos ETBs cause 2 damage. Pashalik Mons is whenever another goblin you control dies, you deal 1 damage to any target. So first of all, if you have infinite mana, you can sack a goblin to produce 2 goblins. So you sack infinite goblins, producing infinite goblins and dealing infinite damage. So it itself is a combo piece. Or if you just have the cards like Ashnod's Altar, for example, you can just sack all these goblins, do tons of damage with Pashalik Mons. We've got Niv Mizzet Parum, which is uncounterable, and whenever you draw, deal 1 to any target, and whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, you draw a card. So every instant or sorcery you cast will draw you a card and deal 1 damage. Goblin Bombardment, you can sack a creature to deal 1 damage. So again, if you're producing tons and tons of goblin tokens or potentially infinite goblin tokens, you can win off that. And then Shared Animosity, 3 mana, whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. So every goblin token that you attack with will get +X, where X is every other attacking goblin. This can get out of hand really fast, even with just a small amount of goblins. Even just casting Shared Animosity itself, just Shared Animosity and nothing else, will produce 3 goblins that you can attack with, and then every one of those goblins will get +2. And that's just Shared Animosity. And then Sorcerer Class, this is a combo card and a win con. So it is, when it enters, you draw 2 and ditch 2. Then you can level it up, and creatures you control have tap, add blue or red, spend the mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell, or to gain a class level. So this second mode here alone can be used to turn all of our goblins into mana dorks that tap for all of these spells that we have, and will produce infinite mana under certain combo conditions. And then the final level, level 3, is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, that spell deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of instant and sorcery spells you've cast this turn. So it's a storm payoff as well. Then, so we've got the combo cards. So of course we've got Ashnod's and Phyrexian Altar to sack these goblins to make mana, along with Skirk Prospector down there. We've got Underworld Breach, which in this deck doesn't win with any of the normal lines like LED, Wheel, Brain Freeze, but we have a lot of cheap spells, including a bunch of fast mana that we can recast off of Breach. So while it's not itself technically a combo piece with anything, it does combo with other things or just get stuff back that we need to win. We've got Mana Echoes. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you add an amount of colorless equal to the number of creatures you control that share a type with it. So every goblin that enters produces X colorless, where X is the amount of goblins you have. So right there, this pays for basically every colorless cost of every spell in the deck. And then we've got the actual, like, straight up combo pieces. So to explain some of these, so we've got Fanning the Flames, X red red, buyback 3, deal X damage to target creature or player. Veyron, Voice of Duality. Ignore the first effect, that part's not relevant. The second part is if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So this makes Ovika produce double the amount of goblins that it normally would. And then we've got Petals of Insight, 5 mana. Look at the top 3 of your library. You may put those cards on the bottom of your library in any order. If you do, return Petals of Insight to its owner's hand. Otherwise, draw 3 cards. So, Petals of Insight is a spell that you can cast infinitely as long as you have the mana to pay for it. So if you've got Ovika plus Sorcerer class on level 2 plus Petals of Insight, all of your goblins tokens that you're making have haste, and they can all tap to produce mana for instants and sorceries, which means you can cast Petals over and over and over, generating more goblins every time. It will generate exactly the number of goblins that you need in order to pay for the next Petals of Insight. Now, if you have Veyron on top of that, you're producing double the amount of goblins, meaning that you'll make infinite goblin tokens, and then you can then attack for infinite mana. Also, if you have Phyrexian Altar, you can just sack the goblins to produce the mana to cast Petals of Insight again, which again with Veyron will produce infinite goblin tokens that you can attack with. Or if you have Phyrexian plus Mana Echoes or Ashnod's Altar or Skirk Prospector, what that means is that you can use the Phyrexian Altar to pay for the blue in the Petals of Insight, and then the other ones to pay for more mana than you need for the rest of the Petals of Insight, meaning you generate infinite mana. Also, if you have a Burgi in play or a Stormkiln Artist in play, you'll generate treasures / red mana every instance of Petals of Insight. So any combination of Petals of Insight plus the mana in order to cast it will either produce infinite goblins or infinite mana. Then you've got Fanning the Flames, which is similar in that you can buy it back for 3, although the buyback does not count towards the mana value of the card. So in order for Fanning the Flames to be infinite, you need to pay X's 2 and buy back it. So that'll mean you pay 7 total mana, 4 of which counts towards the mana value of Fanning the Flames. And then if you have Veyron in play, it doubles the trigger of Ovika. So remember, it's X is 2, so 4 mana value total. Triggers Ovika, double triggers because of Veyron, you make 8 goblins, and Fanning the Flames gets to deal 1 damage to something, meaning you pay 7 per loop, and you keep going over and over and over in order to do 1 damage per instance of Fanning the Flames while generating more tokens. Of course, you do need a way to make mana off of that, so you'll need Ashnod's, Phyrexian, Skirk Prospector, whatever. You need some way to recoup, or, Sorcerer class level 2. You need some way to recoup the mana that you're spending to cast Fanning the Flames with buyback, but as long as you have that, plus Veyron, plus your commander, you can win the game off of that. And there's lots of interconnected combos. So those are like the main things that you need to understand in order to combo off, but there's lots of interconnections in between them, like having Veyron in play, plus something else, having an altar plus another altar. There's lots of different ways that you can go off in order to do this. You also have other ways to do things, like if you've got Burgi or Stormkiln Artist and you're going mana neutral on whatever combo you're doing, then those go mana positive. And if you're producing tons of goblins in the first place, you can use your draw spells to find the last piece of the combo, or you can use your tutors to find the last piece of the combo. Lots and lots and lots of interconnections. in the deck. So you'll ultimately wind up winning either with just flat out swarming the board with too many goblin tokens for your opponent to kill or block properly, or making infinite goblins or infinite mana, or drawing your whole deck. But the actual win con will usually be flooding the board with goblins, usually infinite goblins, and killing your opponent either by attacking them, winning by using like Impact Tremors, Bombardment, Pashalik, or Purphoros to kill them straight up, triggering Niv Mizzet a bunch of times, or buybacking, fanning the flames over and over and over. And that is the main whole of Ovika. Lands, once again, pretty stock Izzet lands. Only things to note are, again, like Cavern of Souls to make Ovika uncounterable. Minamo can like untap the ring. That can be important sometimes. Odawara can maybe bounce something, like if you have Dockside and the Dockside is producing enough mana or producing enough treasures, you can like Odawara the Dockside and play it again to make more treasures. So there's certain things that matter, but it's mostly a pretty straight up Izzet mana base. And that is the totality of the Ovika Enigma Goliath deck.